the harsh reality of archers in the Middle Ages. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and leave a like on the video. Now let's start. Life as a medieval archer was brutal, physically, mentally, and in every other way possible. It wasn't just shooting arrows, it was surviving a job that demanded everything and gave almost nothing back. The real question wasn't whether it was hard, but whether you could do it. Becoming a medieval archer wasn't a choice. It was often your destiny from the time you could stand. Kings across England didn't gently recommend archery. They required it by law. When medieval monarchs enacted archery laws, they were not friendly recommendations. They ordered that every able-bodied male between the ages of 7 and 60 practice with the longbow every Sunday after Mass. Skipping practice meant a fine or a trip to the pillory. Imagine being 10 years old, given a bow almost as high as a T, and told to draw it not once or twice, but hundreds, until your little hands are full of blisters and blood. The adults didn't care about your tears or complaints. Their logic was brutal but simple. If you couldn't draw your bow, you were useless in battle. "One more time," was the constant command, as your shoulders burned and your fingers split. Your first bow might have been smaller, but by the time you were 12 or 13, you were expected to use a real one, which required a strength that would impress even the most muscular modern athlete. The training consisted not only of hitting targets, but of developing the superior, uncommon strength needed to repeatedly draw a bow that required over 150 pounds of draw weight. While other children played, young archers spent hours lifting weights, carrying stones, and repeating the same movement thousands of times until their bodies physically changed. Evidence of this brutal childhood training still exists today in bone remains. Strange deformations, enlarged left arms, crooked spines, and bone spurs on the fingers due to constant tension. In medieval graves, skeletons of archers have been found with the left humerus often 50% larger than the right. Their bodies were literally deformed by their profession. By the age of 16, the best apprentices could shoot up to 12 arrows per minute accurately at 180 meters. Their fingers had permanent grooves and calluses so thick that they could not be pierced by a needle, which was probably helpful considering that medieval medicine was essentially put some dirt on it and keep practicing. The worst? That childhood of pain was just the beginning. After years of brutal training, you might think the archer loved his weapon. The reality was much more complicated. The English longbow was as much a marvel of medieval warfare as it was a constant source of physical torment. First of all, its size. It measured between 5 and 6 feet, often as tall as or taller than the archer himself. Made of yew wood, it weighed between 5 and 6 pounds, but after miles of marching, that weight became a burden. The real brutality was in the force needed to draw it. Recovered bows show tensions of between 40 and 80 kilos, 2 or 3 times more than a modern hunting bow. Imagine lifting a medium-sized dog with 3 fingers and repeating the gesture 400 times in an afternoon. There were no tricks, just brute force. The cost was devastating. The archer's skeletons show enlarged bones, compressed spines, severe arthritis, and bone spurs so large they caused constant pain. But they kept shooting. Maintenance was another battle. Hemp or linen strings had to be waxed regularly and kept dry. Archers carried spare strings wrapped around their heads, under their helmets. Medieval multitasking at its best. The bow itself, if poorly maintained, would warp and become useless. Even well cared for, bows did not last very long. Sometimes they would break after hours of intense combat. Arrows had to be carefully matched to the bow. Too light, and they lost power. Too heavy, and they didn't fly straight. An expert archer could shoot 10 to 12 arrows a minute, adjusting instinctively for distance and wind. Archery wasn't just a skill, it was a way of life. Daily practice was mandatory. and entire groups were fined for taking even a day off. Some archers called their bows the wife. They loved and hated them. One who was caught drinking too much defended himself by saying, "My bow demands everything from me. Beer is the only thing that is mine." And as demanding as this relationship was, the bow was only the beginning of an archer's burden. Traveling light was not an option. Medieval archers carried so much equipment that it would make a modern soldier groan. The burden was not only the emotional burden of the coming combat, but the physical burden of survival. Tools tied to the back, to the belt, crossed over the shoulders. The longbow alone was a challenge, but without arrows it was just a cumbersome stick. And the arrows were certainly not pocket-sized. Many carried them on the belt, hidden in boots or stuck in the ground, hoping that no one would trip over them. Running out of ammunition in battle was a death sentence, so archers carried materials to make more: arrowheads, feathers, and wooden shafts. The more cunning ones carried emergency kits to remake arrows, because there's nothing better than tinkering under enemy fire. The bowstring was another problem. Rain stretched the hemp strings, so at least 3 spare strings wrapped in waxed cloth were carried. Some put them in pouches, some in helmets, and some, it is said, in places best left unnamed. When your life depends on dry strings, dignity is optional. As for armor, the archers were not well equipped. Most of them used jackets padded from 4 to 7 kilos, like fighting inside a mattress. The luckiest ones had mail shirts that added another 9 kilos. The helmet weighed between 1.5 and 2 kilos. A small shield could add another 1.5. Then came the weapons: dagger, hammer, or axe, because stabbing was plan A, but hitting was plan B. Food, water, cloaks, steel, spare boots. In total, an archer carried between 27 and 36 kilos of pure misery. No wonder they said they were half mule and half man, and that an archer without back pain was either dead or a liar. After carrying half your weight across medieval terrain, shooting the bow was the easy part. But even the strongest backs had to keep going. Medieval warfare was not about showing up at the hour of attack, but about surviving the journey there, a brutal ordeal that claimed lives before an arrow was even shot. The day began before dawn, with no coffee or energy drinks, just cold water and hard bread, if you were lucky. Lighting a fire was illegal in enemy territory, so breakfast was as cold as your mood. Then came the march, 30 kilometers a day, sometimes more than 40, carrying 36 kilos of equipment, a kind of daily marathon with poor boots and unpredictable weather. The roads were mud with added suffering. Paved roads were rare. Armies advanced on dirt tracks, open fields, and ankle-breaking paths. Maps were rudimentary, so guides were often unreliable. A French chronicler described English archers as a plague of locusts, with feet so hard that stones seemed to give way beneath them. This was not poetry, but a bitter complaint from those who saw their land trampled underfoot. The footwear situation was depressing. Archers had only one pair of leather boots, thin soles, no padding, certainly not waterproof. When they broke, they were replaced with whatever was available, rags or leather collected from the battlefield. Some hardened their feet by walking barefoot on gravel, or rubbing them with salt and vinegar. The climate was a nightmare. Summer brought heat stroke, winter brought freezing, and rain brought misery. The cold soaked everything, equipment became heavier, and bowstrings were useless. Some armies simply stopped advancing in too much rain, preferring the delay to deadly mud. Sleeping was a luxury. No tents unless you were noble. Most slept on the ground, wrapped in cloaks, hoping not to be eaten by insects. Food? Hard bread that needed to be softened in water to chew, dried meat tougher than armor, and gather, a fancy way of saying, take what you find. That's all for today. What do you think about the life of archers in the Middle Ages? Let me know in the comments. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. See you next time, bye.